5, 6, 7, 8.
Welcome to the EX Podcast, where every week I talk with business leaders, authors, and disruptors on how the workplace is changing. This podcast brings a different lens to the conversation around HR transformation, company culture, and employee engagement. It offers a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Why? Because companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they hope to attract and retain talent. It is time we put people first to rehumanize the workplace. Simply because leaders who don't care about their employees will eventually be surrounded by people who don't care about their business. Today's guest is Brian Mohr, an author, co-founder of Y Scout, the first purpose-based leadership search firm. He's also president of Arizona's Conscious Capitalism chapter. Today, with Brian, we talk about how talent attraction has changed and where it's heading. How does conscious capitalism connect to building employee experiences that matter? Where to start to create a purpose-driven culture and transform your organization. We also talk about his upcoming book, Hiring on Purpose, how the Y Scouts method is revolutionizing the search for leaders. You can use the code EXI_EX Summit for a 20% discount to register for the EX Impact Conference in Orlando from the 27th of February to the 1st of March. It is a 3-day event of dialogue around the strategies for increasing engagement and empowering employees to feel more connected to their work. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Brian. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it would help promote the contents. If you want me to speak at your next events, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions for future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at EX_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Very excited for today's guest, Brian Mohr. Brian is calling from Scottsdale in Arizona. He's an author, the co-founder of Y Scout, the first purpose-based leadership search firm, and he's also a conscious capitalist. Brian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Very much looking forward to the conversation.
All right, so tell us a bit about the life of Brian, and I'm not talking about the movie, but your personal life and what has led you to where you are right now.
So I'll try and keep this as brief as I can. Grew up in Indiana, Northwest Indiana, just south of Chicago, small town. So a Midwest guy at heart. Attended school at Indiana University, and when I graduated, had no idea what I was going to do with my life from a career standpoint. And as luck would have it, leveraged a family relationship and found myself in the financial services industry working for Bank One, who has since been gobbled up and is now part of Chase Bank. And I did that for about the first 5 or 6 years of my career, spent time in the financial services industry. And it was really interesting. While the money was really, really good, and I was good at what I was doing, and I was finding a sense of achievement in what I was doing, at least from a financial standpoint and from a growing sense of responsibilities as my career grew, there was this overwhelming sense, though, that the meaning and purpose behind what I was doing, it just wasn't there. And I don't know that I would have been able to, or if I did articulate it the way I would today as a complete lack of meaning or purpose, but I could feel it. And so thankfully, my wife, we're about to celebrate 20 years, has always been super supportive of all of my endeavors and had encouraged me to step away from the financial services business and pursue something else. And I knew that I was going to do a bit of a do-over, almost a Control-Alt-Delete, if you will, of my career. And partly being at the right place at the right time and quite a bit of persistence, I became one of the original founding members of a job board that had started here in Phoenix, Arizona, called jobbing.com. This was in April of 2000, so right at the turn of the century. And if you think about that time, the newspapers, the daily newspapers, were still far and away the dominant market shareholder of the employment classified market. Most companies and organizations, when they needed to hire people, were still running ads in the Sunday newspaper. And, Monster.com and Hot Jobs and some of the early job boards were beginning to make some noise and create a competitive landscape to the newspaper. But by and large, in the year 2000, when I started, the newspapers were still the dominant employment classified market shareholder. And what was so exciting about joining this job board was giving employers and candidates here in the Phoenix area an alternative to using the Arizona Republic, which is the daily newspaper here in the state of Arizona. And it was just super exciting. It was exciting to be the underdog. It was exciting to be a part of this shift, a bit of a tectonic shift from print to digital as it relates to the employment classified market. And it was also super exciting for me to be a part of a startup organization and one of the first few employees to take an idea and help grow it from just an idea to an incredibly successful business. I was there 11 years. Had an amazing experience. Still to this day, the greatest opportunity that positioned me for what my career has become. And without that 11-year experience, I would not be where I'm at. So huge kudos to the people I had the opportunity to spend 11 years with at jobbing.com. To round out what led me to here, I left jobbing after 11 years, then spent 1 year, a little over a year, leading all of talent acquisition for P.F. Chang's China Bistro and Payway Asian Diner restaurant company. And boy, did I learn a lot about the types of environments where, where it's a good fit for me and where I'm a good fit for the organization. And, Chang's and Payway, for those of you who are listening that know the restaurants, they're unbelievable restaurants. But I had gone from a very entrepreneurial, privately held company of 400 people to a publicly traded company of 26,000. And it was just a bit of a culture shock for me. And I really just wasn't ready for it. It wasn't a good fit for me. And I certainly wasn't a good fit for them. But, with every opportunity comes huge learning opportunities and learning moments. And during my time at P.F. Chang's and Payway, I was responsible for, as I mentioned, talent acquisition. And one of the responsibilities that fell in my lap was some senior level leadership searches that I was the liaison in working with some really well-known global executive search firms. And as that process unfolded, and I was able to participate in it a handful of times, I found the process to be incredibly transactional and very black and white, where, we had a particular senior level role available at the company, and the search firm would begin canvassing the market and looking for other people from competing restaurants who were in that exact same role. And essentially, and these are my words, not anybody else's, but taking one chess piece and moving it into a different box on the chessboard. Right. And it just, the transaction felt, it just didn't feel as human as it could be. And it also felt like the big piece that was missing was the emphasis around, is this the right human being whose dreams and desires and core values line up with the dreams and purpose and mission and values of Chang's and or Payway, depending upon which of the two brands they were going to support? And that it was minimized. And so that's where Y Scouts was born, seeing the process of some of the most well-known global executive search firms do what they do, and seeing an opportunity to really infuse a deep sense of purpose, values, and what I'll just call straight up human alignment into the process felt like an opportunity that I had to explore. So in March of 2012, partnered with an old friend, a good friend named Max Hansen, and we started Y Scouts as the first ever purpose-based leadership search firm. And boy, it's coming up on 7 years. So it's been one heck of an experience, carving out a new niche inside of a bit of a traditional old industry that I think needs a little bit of shakeup.
It's interesting that we'll go more into talent attraction and acquisition trends in a few minutes, but what you were talking about when you were at PFT Chang's, it's interesting because you were transferring industry knowledge from one company to PFC Chang. But how did it work on the cultural side? Because obviously when you may be very knowledgeable about the specific industry and how to run restaurant operations, but how do you make sure that you find the right fit culturally?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question. And that question was exactly the question we were asking ourselves, Max and I, as we were thinking about, how would we begin to redesign the executive hiring process if we could redesign it? Given a blank slate, what would we do differently? And that question you just asked is exactly where we started, which is how do you really determine if the cultural values, purpose alignment between an individual and a company is aligned? And how do you do that? And what we realized is it requires two very, very specific actions, committed actions to do. Number one is before you even begin looking for the candidate, we needed to spend significant time really understanding truly what the company's culture is, what the company values are, not the ones that are necessarily posted on the wall, but the ones that are truly lived out through behaviors, and doing that learning with the company to make sure that we've got a deeply held sense of what is this organization really all about culturally? Who are the types of people that thrive? What are the kinds of behaviors that are being recognized and rewarded? Not necessarily just focusing on industry experience, but what are the human interactions and the way the work is getting done inside the company? Once we had that level of understanding, we could then, and of course the understanding of what the job is that they were needing assistance in filling, we could then take that knowledge, and as we reach out to candidates proactively, one of the things that makes Y Scouts unique is we never post jobs and wait for people to apply. We would only go after people who have not yet expressed an interest and even maybe looking for a new opportunity. And when you engage somebody that isn't actively looking and simply reach out and say, hey, Joe, Sally, Jim, Jennifer, whatever their name is, we are a purpose-based executive search firm. We are working with an amazing organization that has built a very, very special culture around a very special purpose. And they're looking for someone who has a lot of the types of experiences that we see in your background. But before we even get into that, we would like to just spend some time getting to know you, the person, not you, the resume. And so we'd like to invite you to just spend some time with us and let's build a relationship. And if at the end of our first conversation or few conversations, the things that are most important to you don't line up with what this organization's all about, okay, great. It's not a good fit, but at least we've learned about you, the person, and what matters to you culturally, mission-wise, purpose-wise, career-wise. And then we can begin keeping our eyes and ears open for what other opportunities might be a good fit for them. And so it's a very deliberate process. It moves a bit slower on the front end, but this idea of going slow to inevitably go fast and find the matches that are truly aligned at every level, to us is just, I don't know that there's anything more critical than the businesses that we are working with, making sure that they're inviting the right people into their organization, especially at the leadership level.
So as you see, you've been in talent attraction and acquisition for quite some time. What has changed in the past 5 years, and where is it heading, and how talent acquisition executive must do to be able to stay competitive in the marketplace?
I think that it's another great question. I think probably the biggest change would be, I guess, what I would call the transparency quotient. This idea that both candidates and the companies, we can virtually find everything out about both sides of the equation, if you will. If I'm a hiring manager and I'm looking to hire a new employee onto my team, the ability to really learn about who they are and do so, just leveraging the power of the World Wide Web is at my fingertips, and vice versa. If I'm a candidate and I'm contemplating joining a new company and I want to learn everything there is to learn about that company, boy, the amount of available resources at my fingertips, again, using the World Wide Web, is just, it's massive. And so I think the biggest change, if I had to pick just one, would be this transparency that now exists. And the days of, both an individual as well as a company attempting to paint a picture that truly isn't the reality, you're going to get found out. And so it's just, it's a good thing. It's a really good thing. We have the ability to know everything we need to know to make really, really good decisions, both from the standpoint of the leaders we hire or the people we hire, and then for the individuals as to the companies they go to work for. And I think that's a really, really good thing. I think the other big change that needs to happen at a faster rate is the idea that inside of companies today, every member of the company should think of themselves as having a role in the talent acquisition process. We can't, at least I don't think it's feasible to leave talent acquisition solely on the shoulders of the talent acquisition function exclusively. Dependent upon the company size and how many people a company is trying to hire, if placing the responsibility solely on a talent acquisition team or a recruiter is the strategy, I think that's a tough strategy to execute at a high degree of success. And all of the members of the team, being great brand ambassadors, should always simply be on the lookout for great talent who look like and feel like they'd be a really, really great fit for the company that they're working for. So I think those are the two biggest changes. One, the transparency, and two, this need that companies need to engage their entire workforce as an extension of their recruiting team.
Does it have a cost? The question is, do you have to monetize or incentivize your employees to spread the word and how great it is to work for the company? Like, we talk a lot about referral bonuses and programs where you pay employees a certain amount if they refer someone to the company. Does it have to be this way, or can you find other ways to incentivize the employees without necessarily having a bonus?
Listen, I don't. Employee referral bonuses, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I'm sure there's a number of excellent examples and models out there of how companies are leveraging and rewarding their existing employees to refer, folks that they think would be a great fit. On the flip side, though, I'm a believer that you don't have to pay your employees to refer good people who could potentially be their fellow colleagues and future teammates. I think if the organization, if the company, if the leadership team really believes in a higher purpose around the business, where they're leveraging the power of their business to achieve something that is intrinsically motivating for everybody that works there, I think you've now created an environment where people enjoy coming to work. And of course, we all have our bad days, but by and large, you've created an environment where people enjoy coming to work. They find value and meaning in the work that's being done. And they also find tremendous value and place a very high premium on the fact that they're coming to a workplace every day, spending 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, however many hours per day. And given the amount of time we spend with our teammates, why wouldn't we want to be surrounded by a whole bunch of people that we really enjoy spending time with? Yeah. And so the incentive to me is, okay, if my options are to spend time with people who suck the life out of me, or on the flip side, spend time with people who I genuinely enjoy being around because they challenge me, they help me grow, we laugh, we've got each other's backs, there's a high degree of trust and psychological safety in the workplace, I'm sorry, I'll choose the latter, and you don't need to pay me to do that because that's its own reward for me. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are just like me. In fact, I think most people would prefer that. Throwing me an extra incentive, there's nothing wrong with it. But I don't need it. I would rather spend my time with people I truly enjoy being around than being incented just to hire people, but that are eventually not going to be a good fit, or people that I don't enjoy being with.
Well, it shouldn't be the primary motivator, and that's for sure.
Totally.
You're involved in conscious capitalism. What is your motivation, and how does it relate to building employee experiences that matter?
So the whole conscious capitalism movement hit my radar about 6 or so years ago. And just one of those very fortunate moments, I was in a Whole Foods market and saw there's actually a book called by the title Conscious Capitalism. Mm-hmm. It was written co-authored by John Mackey, who is the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods Market, and a gentleman named Raj Sisodia, who's a marketing professor at Babson College in Boston. And it's a very bright yellow colored book, and so it grabs your attention. I grabbed it. It was an interesting mix of words. Typically you put the word conscious and capitalism together, and some people may immediately just call BS. Like there's capitalism, at least the more traditional form of capitalism, which to me is crapitalism. It's not capitalism. I picked up the book and read through it, and when I put the book down, it was one of those moments where the book simply provided a framework and a language to the way I believe business should be done, which at the end of the day, business is about creating shared value for everybody that the business needs in order for the business to do what it does. And that includes the shareholders, the investors, the owners, the employees, the customers, the vendors and suppliers, and the community in which the business operates. So there's this ecosystem of stakeholders that every business is dependent upon in order for it to achieve its goal, its purpose. And conscious capitalism is simply a way of organizing business around a language and a framework that helps clearly state what business can be, what capitalism can be. And I think it matters tremendously around your question of employee experience, in that I think because of the transparency that we talked about earlier and how much more we can learn about the companies that we work for today before we go work there, that this desire that people have to contribute to a cause greater than just their own self-gain is a very, very motivating factor. In fact, I would call it part of the human condition, that we want to make a contribution. We want to feel a sense of purpose and meaning. And at the core of conscious capitalism is this notion that business should exist for a higher purpose beyond just profit maximization. And I want to say something that making a lot of money and being highly profitable is awesome, and businesses should absolutely do that. But the profit they generate should be viewed as a scorecard of the value they're creating for their entire community of stakeholders. The profit itself shouldn't be the primary purpose. It should be the scorecard of the value that you're creating. And if you run your business well, if you have a good product, a good service, great employees, great customers, an excellent group of vendors and suppliers, and a group of investors or shareholders or owners that are all aligned, you'll work harmoniously together, and you can create a tremendous amount of shared value, which will then yield a tremendous amount of profit. And I think it's an excellent model, and a model that needs a very, very bright light shined upon it so that we can continue to restore the value of capitalism. And at the risk of getting a tad long-winded on this one topic, there are a lot of competing economic models that are beginning to, gain some momentum in the public opinion. And it's, to me, somewhat frightening that we're losing faith in the capitalistic model for a variety of reasons. And I think the number one way to restore capitalism's reputation and begin to elevate it is to ensure that the leaders who are making the decisions are recognizing that creating win-wins for their entire community is one of the most important things in order to continue to have capitalism thrive and create human flourishing and prosperity across the globe.
It's interesting because, not going into politics, but when you think of the movie Wall Street in the 80s, there's an association between capitalism and greed.
Yeah.
And not so much about capitalism and doing good. So just to expand a bit on this, some may argue that it's easier to shape a purpose-driven culture if you're an outdoor company such as Patagonia or REI, for instance, or a healthcare network like Davida or others. But it's much difficult to do this in, let's say, the banking industry or the financial sector or manufacturing sector. What would you advise leaders who are listening to us to create a purpose-driven culture and transform the organization?
So it's another great question. And what's interesting about the whole purpose-driven movement that I believe has just gained a tremendous amount of the spotlight over the past probably 5, 6, 7 years, I think most people immediately default to this idea that in order to be purpose-driven, you must be doing something that is what I'll just call saving the world or making the world a better place in some way. And it's very externally focused. Not every business that exists has some sort of externally focused save the world type of component to their product or service. And I think what has been lost in the hype around the purpose-driven movement is this notion that I would argue the most noble purpose that exists in business today is the way in which the leaders of a business can invest, nurture, develop, and care for their employees. You think about that. The leaders, the job of a leader is to truly help the people that they have the honor and privilege of leading, to help those people become the best version of themselves while they're in the care and watchful eye of whomever the leaders are. And so for any organization out there that is seeking to transform or innovate and become more purpose-driven, I think I would give two pieces of advice. One is, if what your business does, if the purpose or mission of the business doesn't have some external sort of save the world component, don't try and fabricate one that isn't there. Instead, simply look internally and think about, okay, what we do, the products and services that we are creating and delivering to our clients, it's a needed service, but it isn't saving or changing the world. Instead, look internally and simply begin to focus on how can we as leaders do everything possible to create an environment in which the people who choose to come to work with us day in, day out and help us deliver our products and services, let's invest in them and help them become the best human beings that we can. Knowing that in the long run, if we do that we will eventually build an amazing employee experience, we will build an amazing employer brand, and we will become known as an organization that invests and nurtures the people who come work for our company. And whether or not those people stay with us for 1 month, 10 years, or their entire career, over time, we will build something very, very special where more and more people will want to come work for us because of the focus on investing and nurturing and developing our people. The second thing I would say is if that feels too much of a stretch or perhaps unattainable, the really simple tactic as a number 2 suggestion would be to simply talk to a wide swath of the people who work for your company and ask them, what do you find to be, the thing you enjoy most about what we do here at insert company name? What is it that drives you? What is it that you feel like we're making a difference in the world around? Is it our products? Is it our services? Is it the way we operate in the community? What is it that we're doing that you find purposeful? And if you ask, a grouping of the employees who work there, over time, you'll eventually find some patterns that you can tap into and then begin, codifying those patterns into some sort of a succinct purpose statement that can become the guiding light or the beacon for the organization and really rally people around it.
It's a very interesting point because it's very common sense to get feedback from the product marketplace. You get feedback from your customers using your product or your services through various channels, whether it's a VOC channel, it's the Salesforce, whatever it might be. You're able to get some insights and some feedback from the customers. But for whatever reason, it's much harder for leaders to embrace the idea of reaching out to the employees and find out what's important to them and what matters to them.
Yeah, which isn't that a fascinating thought, right? Why would the leaders feel any level of apprehension to seek the input from the people who are oftentimes closest to the customer delivering the product or the service? And, I think what you're hitting on is perhaps a transformation that has been happening and is continuing to accelerate in what does it actually mean to be a leader today? I believe the world we've come from, and I would imagine you'd agree, the leaders were expected to have all the answers, to know the strategy, and you weren't allowed to answer a question with "I don't know." Today, I believe the role of leaders has shifted so dramatically that leaders need to, of course, provide a vision and work on strategy. But the thought that the leaders have to have all the answers is insane. It's such a myopic focus on so few people having the burden and responsibility of having all the answers. Why wouldn't we tap into the collective knowledge of all of the people who are working with us and for us and involve them in the process, gain their feedback and opinions? The worst thing that could happen is that the feedback and opinions they share end up not being overly useful, but you've involved them. And I think we'd all agree that, we are more bought into the things we feel, a part of or involved in. If our voice was heard, even if it's not enacted on, we're still going to feel much more ownership of wanting to see it through than if we were never asked in the first place. So I think it's this transition of leadership and the willingness and sense of courage and vulnerability of leaders today, reaching out, declaring that they don't have all the answers and they need help and they want to make it a team effort, not this hero mentality that I think leadership was in the past and is greatly moving away from.
So let me ask you a question and let me see how you react to it. We're talking about conscious capitalism, purpose-driven vulnerability of the leaders. This week in Europe, in the UK specifically, Theresa May, the Prime Minister in the UK, had a vote of confidence in the parliaments. There's been a lot of talks about the Brexit and what the plan should look like, and the plan was rejected. And therefore, the minority had a vote of confidence, whether or not the representatives in the House of Parliament would still had confidence in her leadership. Do you see that something could happen in the corporate world where the CEO may do a vote of confidence to the employees and say, do you still have confidence in me? Do you still trust me in leading you and the organization? Or is it just an extrapolation or a utopia that would never happen?
It's a super interesting comparison and not one that I have thought about in that realm, the way you described it. My gut reaction to that question is that employees, if they lose confidence in the leaders or the CEO in particular, I think they have a choice to make. They can either group together and begin a constructive dialogue with the leadership team, expressing their concerns. If they want to make some changes, if they're committed to making changes because they believe wholeheartedly in the purpose of the organization, and maybe there just is some leadership issues that can be fixed. But I think the alternative, which is probably what happens 99% of the time, is that the employee actually does express no confidence and they leave. They quit, right? Yeah. They're saying, I don't have any confidence in you by leaving. Now, that's not the only reason employees leave companies, of course, right? I mean, if they get a better job opportunity, there's, their dream job, comes true, or a spouse moves and they have to move across the country. I mean, there's a variety of reasons why an employee would leave a company. And it's not always directly related to a lack of confidence in the leadership team or the CEO. But in this one scenario, using the UK example and the confidence, the Theresa May example and Brexit and all of that, I think employees, if they are fed up with the way the organization's being led and they don't have confidence in the leadership team, they'll just go find another job and they'll go work somewhere else. And especially, here we are at the beginning of 2019. This labor market and the recruitment market, this is as fiercely competitive as I've ever seen it. Yeah. There is such a demand for great talent, and the supply is very, very, very limited. And boy, if leaders today aren't really tuned into their cultures, their people, and ensuring that things are moving as harmoniously as possible, they're going to lose their talent to somebody else in a blink of an eye, and it's happening. So it is a candidate-driven market right now. That is for sure.
You're about to publish your first book, Hiring on Purpose: Why or How the Y Scouts method is revolutionizing the search for leaders. Yep. Can you tell us a bit more about what the book is and why you wrote it?
So I co-authored it with Max, and what we wanted to do was capture the first 6 to 7 years of what we've learned by completely reimagining the leadership recruiting process or the executive recruiting process. And our goal in writing the book was to capture our learning, get it out there to as many people as we could, because we believe the ways in which we've approached leadership recruiting, that same methodology applies to recruiting everybody. And really, at the end of the day, it's about making sure that the process itself of recruiting people remains a very human-based process. And we are not anti-technology, but as technology continues to penetrate every part of all of our lives, both Max and I and the entire team at Y Scouts believe that recruiting is an inherently human activity. These are people choosing other people to spend their time with, working on some sort of a product or service or combination of both that fuels the business. And we want more of the business world to adopt a more human-centered approach to their recruiting practices and begin to move away from this notion that, well, if the job description and the resume have all of the right keywords and career trajectories, then this must be the right match. It's just not that simple. It's not that black and white. And, so much is being talked about, the jobs of the future that are coming are jobs that don't even exist yet. So all and hard skill experience matching that has dominated the recruiting process up till now, I don't think it's going to serve us nearly as well as it has. And so we're going to need to make sure that the recruiting process becomes more human, not less human, which is going to be really, really hard given how much technology is advancing and helping us become more efficient in how we do things. And
so how do you see finding the right balance between technology, automation, which somehow can lead to a bit more personalization of the candidate experience, to the human aspect? So how do you balance technology versus human touch?
So I think you nailed it even in the question. It is a balance. It's leveraging the technology to create some level of efficiency at the beginning of the process, and how can we leverage technology to create a great experience for both the organization and the individual candidate. But as soon as that initial efficiency gain has been made, let's not lose sight of how important it is from an employee experience or a candidate experience in this scenario that, the recruiting process really begins and that overall employee experience begins during the recruiting process. So if we're using technology the whole way and we don't actually introduce a human being into the process until, very, very late in the game, I think that speaks volume about perhaps what the experience at the company is going to be like. And I would interpret that as a very technology-driven environment with a low human interaction ratio. On the flip side, if I'm leveraging technology to increase some level of efficiency on the front end, but then immediately inserting a human connection into the process, that's going to give the candidate a very different experience, which should then lead to a different employee experience, one that is balanced with technology for what technology can do, and one that really cherishes what human beings can do that technology can't. So I think it's all in the balance.
For some of the executives who are listening to us right now, what kind of advice would you have for them who are looking for a career transition? They, may look at maybe joining a more purpose-driven organization.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I actually get this question from colleagues and friends more often than I thought I would. And my answer to this is, before even starting to look at jobs or going on to LinkedIn or Indeed or wherever you might go look for jobs, I think we owe it to ourselves to first answer the question of, what am I going to use as the most important decision-making criteria that would lead me to find a sense of meaning, fulfillment, and of course being able to achieve whatever lifestyle requirements they have based on where they're at in their career. So for example, for me, and this is work that I continue to do, And I've arrived at 3 criteria that are of critical importance to me. So if I were going to make a change in my career and go work for a company different than what I'm doing today, the following 3 criteria must be present. These conditions must exist for me to even consider making the move. In no particular order. Number 1 is that whatever the work is, it must be meaningful to me, and I define that as it must be in service to a cause much greater than my own. Mm-hmm. The second piece is I'm not a structured 8 to 5, 8 to 6 kind of guy. I'll work, sometimes 15 hours a day, sometimes 4 hours a day. Sometimes I'll work on Saturday and Sunday. I need a tremendous amount of freedom and flexibility to be able to do and operate, in alignment with my peak operating system. Mm-hmm. And then number 3 is the people that I'm going to be spending my time with. I want them to be an extension of my family. I want to be able to treat them and them me as if we were brothers and sisters. And that requires a really, really deep level of trust, of vulnerability, and of safety with one another. And dare I say, a level of love that to me is just very, very important. It's a premium that I place on my work experience. I don't want to leave my wife and my daughters at the beginning of every day who, I live in this cocoon of love in my house with my family. I don't want to leave that loving environment to go to a non-loving environment. Yeah. Now, I realize it's going to be a different type of love, but I want to go to a place where we are appreciating each other, we respect each other, we trust each other, we're vulnerable, we take risks. That's super important to me. So those are my 3 criteria. Everybody's criteria is probably a little bit different. And so as an individual, if you're contemplating making a move from whatever you're doing today, before you even start looking at jobs, understand your decision-making criteria. That's mine, and everybody needs to figure out what matters most to them and then use that as your decision-making filter.
I love it. But it's the time, like in any episode, to ask some fun questions to our guest.
Fabulous.
Which profession other than your own today would you like to attempt?
Oh, I would love to be the lead guitar player in a rock and roll band. That would be awesome. This is fantasy land here. I started playing guitar about 3.5 years ago. I'm proficient, but I am not anywhere near ready for being a lead guitar player in a rock and roll band, but I'm working on it. But if I could instantaneously, somehow have the skills of a Stevie Ray Vaughan or an Eric Clapton or any other guitar great, that's what I would attempt for sure.
If you were to pick an existing bands or the former bands that separated, which one would you pick?
Which band would I join?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I could pick just one. If I had to pick just one, it would go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, type of music.
Oh, the type of music.
Yeah.
Oh,
if it's easier.
Well, the type of music would be, I'll call it, it's definitely rock and roll. But probably more along the lines of, like the Allman Brothers Band and Led Zeppelin and the Grateful Dead and some of the bands, I guess, of the 60s and 70s that really pioneered, or the Beatles, those types of bands that really just sort of catapulted rock and roll from its early infancy to what has really become the root foundation of what I think great music is all about.
Okay, very cool. What was your biggest screw up at work, and what did you learn from it?
Oh wow. So I've actually had 2 really big screw ups. I've actually had a lot of screw ups, but two come to mind. When I was at jobbing.com, the job board that I talked about earlier in our conversation, I was leading our Phoenix team, and we had just an amazing group of both inside and outside salespeople. And we were going through some really, really fast growth, and we were going to be elevating my role into a different role, which was going to open up a vacancy to lead our Phoenix team. And I made the fatal decision of not looking at a couple of people internally. One in particular, I'll just share his first name. His name's Tim. He was an amazing member of our team, just full of heart and soul and passion. He was a member of the outside sales team. And I made just the fatal decision to not even entertain him as a candidate to replace me, because in our most previous one-on-one, he was simply sharing with me how much fun he was having. The role was meeting his needs. He was making great money. And I just assumed he wouldn't have been interested in the promotional opportunity. And once we started the recruiting process for my replacement as I was being promoted, and we were getting near our selection of the lead candidate, Tim came into my office and resigned. And I was just stunned. And he was very emotional, and he was heartbroken that I didn't even consider him as my successor. And I explained to him it wasn't a deliberate, as if he wasn't qualified. I said I made the assumption based on our very previous one-on-one that he was just loving what he was doing, and that's what he wanted to do. And so, the lesson I learned was that, you can't make assumptions. And I did, and I ended up losing an amazing team member who was just so disappointed and heartbroken that he was passed over without even mention. It led him to pursue another opportunity, and by that time, there was nothing I could do to talk him out of it. And that one stung. I mean, that happened back, I don't know, probably 12, 13 years ago, and it still sticks with me. And it was a great learning lesson, and I thanked him for that. It was a huge moment. The other one that comes to mind is when I got recruited away from jobbing.com to join the PF Chang's team. I should have done a heck of a lot more due diligence on the culture and just this notion of going from a privately held small startup to a publicly traded large company, and just really doing my due diligence on the cultural differences. And shame on me, I didn't do it. And, a 10-year company didn't last. It was 12, 13 months. And, but with that came, the Y Scouts opportunity and conscious capitalism and everything that has come from it. So while I guess part of it was a mistake, it certainly was a learning opportunity. And I wouldn't be where I'm at today without having made really any of my mistakes. But those are the two that immediately come to mind.
What is your favorite word?
What is my favorite word? I think my favorite word is dad.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think my favorite word is dad. Yeah, definitely dad.
What is your least favorite word?
It's probably dad, too. It depends on the context in which it's being used.
That's awesome.
That's funny. I'm going to go with dad and dad.
That's cool. That's a great way to end the conversation. So what is the best way for our listeners to follow you and Y Scouts on social media?
So I think the easiest way, to follow me, I'm fairly active on Twitter. My handle is @Brian Mohr, Brian with an I, and Mohr is Mohr, so @Brian Mohr. Y Scouts is @Y Scouts, which is the letter Y and then the word Scouts. My personal website is brianmohr.com. The Y Scouts website is yscouts.com. And I'd love to just make a quick mention. The conscious capitalism movement, both here in Arizona, is growing tremendously. It's growing tremendously on a global basis. And boy, I would just encourage anyone that is taking an interest in leveraging their business to be a very powerful force for good in the lives of people. Check out Conscious Capitalism, and the best place to do that is at their website, which is consciouscapitalism.org. Great site to tune into, and there's a big annual conference coming to the Phoenix area in late April, and it's going to be an awesome event over a 3-day period here in April.
Wonderful. Any last word of wisdom or advice?
I think for the leaders out there, and frankly everybody that is tuning in, lead with love. We're all humans, and I think at the end of the day, despite all of the shenanigans that are happening in our world right now, I think we're all far more alike than we are different. And I think John Lennon and the Beatles were dead on, and all you need is love. And if we just operate more from a place of love, I think we can figure this all out. And maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but I would say let's lead with love.
Love it. Lead with love. Thank you so much, Brian. It's been a fun conversation today.
Agreed. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Great questions, and thanks for letting me be a guest on the podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.